I give a fuck? Why do I give a fuck? Why do I try so hard? Why do I care so much?
Welcome to Why Do I Give a Fuck? A cross-cultural conversation between myself, Diane Tate,
and Johanna Thompson. In these times of great struggle and possible shift, we ask ourselves,
why do we give a fuck about any of it? How does the lens we see the world through impact what we see?
And what do we do about it? All right, and welcome back. We're going to continue this conversation because we were last talking about a number of federal workers that are being laid off. And some of the highlight that you brought up was the federal workers from the Park Service, the Parks Department. What are the numbers? What are some of the numbers that you've heard on that?
Of course, it's it's a daily changing situation, but last week alone, I believe there were some 6,000 employees that were terminated from the IRS. There were about 5,000 folks that were terminated from agencies across Health and Human Services. And it looks like maybe 1,000 national park employees. Of course, that number might have gone up between now, but somewhere around 20,000 federal workers and contractors have been laid off in just the past
20,000. 20,000. And they're being laid off by Elon Musk's team. Because the question I had was, what position does Elon Musk have to be, leading these mass layoffs of our government workers?
That's a moving target too, because originally it was reported that he and Vivek Ramaswamy, who also ran for president as one of
President.
the Republican candidates early on, that the two of them were co-leaders of this new departmental agency, federal department called the Department of Government Efficiency, otherwise known as DOGE, DOGE. And so, but just in this past week, I heard at some point Trump saying that because there are, as you would imagine, there are, I don't know how many lawsuits that have been filed in federal and state level, probably courts, challenging Trump's, giving this unfettered
Power.
access to Elon
Mm.
Musk, especially the IRS records. That was a lot of the buzz last week.
Yeah, man. How is he giving away all of everybody's IRS records and
Yeah,
then firing employees right before tax season?
I know.
You know,
I
this
don't
is
know.
like gonna be
It's yeah,
chaos.
yeah, yeah. Because Trump is always making a big deal about how he's going to be bringing in all of this new revenue, all of this revenue that has been owed to the US for, however many decades from other countries and from our own taxpayers, corporations that aren't paying their fair share. And yet he's firing all these people at the IRS. It's like, well, who's going to be
It's
processing?
gonna be, yeah.
But then also too, getting to the part that we've discussed, kind of touched on in previous episodes about the impact to real people on the ground, Social Security checks. Are they going to get cut and sent out the way they need to be if people are being fired, en masse? And
Hmm.
so humans to do these activities, to get these
Yeah.
checks cut and sent, then are people who live off of their Social Security and rely on it to keep a roof over their heads and food on their tables and medicines in their bodies. What are they going to do if they don't get their Social Security checks? And so, yeah,
Well, it'll be a problem,
it'll be,
right? It'll be like a very, very big problem when we're looking at, like, I'm curious, like, what is the demographic breakdown of who gets Social Security across the states, right? Like, where is there going to be a mass of humans that need that resource? And that's how we're going to be able to determine
yeah,
what happens in those spaces
right.
because people, I mean, our system is structured set up that people rely on those things,
Mm-hmm.
like
Oh, yeah.
for all of the living expenses. It's not like supplemental income. It is the foundational income that you rely on. That's why
And
there's
they're
jokes about the
the
first of
same.
the month
Yeah,
and stuff. Yeah. Yeah, yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
So yeah, so I mean, I do believe that our court system, maybe for the first time ever, is being utilized in a productive way in terms of trying
Hmm.
to use the courts to stop and overturn some of his executive orders
Hmm.
and some of those court, I mean, I by no means have a broad understanding of all of the court actions that are floating around out there, but I know that there are some there are many. ACLU is supporting quite a bit of those actions trying to stop his executive orders. But the problem is that he's even come out to say there were, I think, I might be misstating this, but I believe that there was a court action, there was a lawsuit that was filed against him to stop Elon from having
I'm
unfettered
having
access
myself.
to people's IRS information. And
Hmm.
there was a federal level judge that said, no, that's not cool. And then Trump came out and said, well, I don't have to listen to him. And he's, yeah, and he's made a few of his Truth Social tweets that basically, I think one of them said, no one is breaking the law when they're trying to save the country. So he's basically saying I can do whatever I want as long as
However
I'm
I want, because I'm trying to save the country, but save the country from what?
right.
Do you know what I mean?
Right.
Save
Right.
the country from this kind of narrative that we're seeing, because you sent me this article about the person, the unions that have won political power in
Right.
Germany, and
Right.
one of them being the Christian Democratic Union, and then this other alternative to the right
AF,
wing, um,
AFD uh,
AFD, alternative to the right.
for Germany. It's Deutschland. So our alternative for
The
Deutschland.
Deutschland, for Deutschland. Yeah, I should know that,
Um,
having taken German in high school. But but the way that the article was written, it was saying the alternative to the right wing. But point being that the amount of political support that these two parties received has turned out to have an election where we are definitely seeing these very authoritarian figures um, coming into positions of power. And that is what, so we're going to start seeing that type of level of leadership all across the globe.
mhm,
Very right wing, very high Christian, using religion to
mhm,
help control the masses, I do want to say. And so we're seeing this trend across the globe, which
mhm.
means that there is something in the psychology of the narratives that we say in our mind that we want this new world order
Yeah.
that prioritizes dominance in a specific way.
Yeah.
Um, um, and so that's going to be really very interesting because as these structures are being set up, the reality of the situation is that there is a larger mass than there was before of people without. And we know when that happens, to your point, this is when the revolutions definitely happen, where
Yeah.
people are ready to really change structures in their entirety. And I'm just wondering how much easier that's going to be because if we're talking about like what we're seeing with migration patterns and we're seeing,
Mhm.
more narrative storytelling about the planes that are crashing and things like that. When we know that planes do have problems, we just don't hear the stories about them on a typical basis. And now that is going to discourage people from being on traveling. They're already limiting freedom of movement across countries. It's becoming harder to get visas. Borders are closing. You communicated that there's, more immigration ICE facilities, detention facilities being erected. We know cop cities are being erected. We saw that played out in Palestine and Gaza with the IDF militarized places that then became stopping points
West Bank right now, the
for
West Bank
movement.
is, yeah, I mean, the tanks are in and they're starting to do in the West Bank, not starting. It's been happening for a minute, but it's escalating even amongst the ceasefire that is not
Hmm.
really a ceasefire. Yeah, they're bulldozing the West Bank just like they've been bulldozing Gaza now for
Hmm.
and Trump has been very transparent about what he wants to do in Gaza. He wants, and,
Mm,
you know, it's what Bibi has wanted the whole time too, is the
right.
eradication of all Palestinians so that they can,
Build
formally
up
the entire
station.
land, but Trump is calling it
Yeah.
the Israeli Riviera is what he is
Mm,
for the coastline of Gaza. And so he's being very transparent, and we will own it. He's saying we will run them all out, and we will own it, and it will be the most beautiful place. And then when reporters are asking, well, why do you think the Palestinians will want to leave their home? And he said, because it's a horrible place. It's a horrible. They're living in such horrible destruction, and then of course they would want to leave because we will build beautiful places for them and other places that they will go to. He has absolutely no concept of an indigenous mindset, which I'm not surprised by. I'm just saying out loud by the fact that is their land, that is their indigenous cultural land, and no, they don't want to leave it regardless of it's in rubble because of us. So why would that be the impetus behind them wanting to leave? So yeah,
land would belong to whiteness, I'm wondering,
yeah.
across the globe. Like
Yeah.
what land would actually be, I'm trying to think of the places. What land historically has belonged to this concept of white that we understand now?
Oh, this concept of white.
Hmm.
Off the top of my head, all I would say was any land that was colonized. That
Hmm.
only through colonization does this version of
Does
whiteness.
this type of whiteness get to say, I have ownership over the
Right,
land?
right.
Because you don't.
You know,
It's very
yeah,
skewed. You don't, and
yeah.
everything is a take and a displace. You
Hmm.
know,
Hmm.
um,
There
and we're
are
going to see more of it.
people, there are countries that are predominantly white and maybe historically have been predominantly white, even though a lot we know that we all came from Africa. All life
Hmm.
spawns from the continent, but as people migrated and
Migration
went into
species.
different climates and lost the melanin over generations of being there, there are places like my ancestral land, which is Scotland, that would be predominantly considered to be white, but whiteness, the concept of whiteness being dominant in a land that everybody looks the same
Hmm.
reverts back to its indigenous mindset in terms of we are
Hmm.
one with the land. And so yeah, this version of whiteness only exists in colonization. And
Right. Right. In colonized communities, because I'm thinking if we were in Scotland or Ireland or any of the places where humans are white skinned
mm,
at this point, I don't think they're calling themselves white. They're calling themselves Scottish and Irish. I could be wrong.
right, I'm not
But
sure, but yeah,
yeah,
I don't
no,
even.
but and when we say this version of whiteness, that's what we're talking about
Right,
because the concept of whiteness is a created concept after
right.
1942, after
Mhm.
they made
Yes,
whiteness, right? So
yes,
we're about to see what they're making of whatever this new world order configuration is going to look like. I don't
right,
know what they're going to call it,
right.
but that's what we're talking about. We're talking about recreating and redefining what humanity looks like in a very militarized way, different and technological way, different than we've historically experienced it, but it is the same process
Right.
of
And the
domination.
outcome,
It's the same, going in, being extremely violent and aggressive, saying that it's manifest destiny, moving the people that are there, and saying that they never were there,
right.
robbing and
Disappearing or
stealing their
passing them
stories,
off the face.
robbing and stealing their history, robbing and stealing their name, robbing and stealing their food culture, all of the things, removing them to a different place and then creating this other narrative of existence and storytelling that is actually not based in fact and truth, and then that we all learn and hear and understand and think that it's okay for it to happen.
Yeah,
And I'm
I'm
hoping that that
curious.
changes though.
I'm sorry, I
No,
interrupted.
go ahead.
Well, as
Go
you
ahead.
describe that, I'm curious, or what comes up for me is wondering whether or not it would be as successful. I'm thinking back to after the Civil War
Mhm.
and after Reconstruction, when the Jim Crow laws came in, and when the United Daughters of the Confederacy, took over the narrative that was then published in the textbooks.
Mhm.
One of the reasons why that worked is because they got access to the one thing that was teaching the next generations, which was textbooks. But of course, we
Yep.
didn't have internet, we didn't have TV, we didn't have
Yep.
this broadcasting kind of things. So now, where they're trying to change the narrative and they're trying to disappear people and they're trying to erase history on a more and they're even getting their own narratives. Like
That
they're
makes
cutting
terrible.
off their own noses despite their own faces. I don't know if you heard, most recently living in Florida, the gentleman who is Israeli in Florida that shot two people in the street because he believed them to be Palestinian, finding out after he shot them that they were actually Israeli. And then one of the victims of the shooting turned around and tried to say that the shooting was anti Semitic when it was an Israeli gentleman that shot two other Israeli people thinking that they were Palestinian. And then
Hmm.
one of the victims tried to say that the shooter was that it was a hate crime and that the shooter was, I mean, it was a hate crime if he thought they were Palestinians, but the fact that they were of the same ilk, it would be like and then
Chaos.
the narrative was
That's
all,
wild.
isn't that crazy? And so
Yeah,
that's
that's so wild.
they're tripping on each other to even get their narrative right, and they're all falling for the wrong, they're making the wrong judgments.
Confused.
So, and I wonder if that's a function. I said all that to say that I wonder if that's a function of the fact that we have such a broader access to information now that you can't just
Yeah.
do things in the shadows as much as you used to because people have cameras everywhere and they're filming everything everywhere and people, Karens can't be Karens without somebody getting it on film and so it's like,
The accountability,
yeah.
right? Like it's really
And
accountability
I know
for
that's why they're going
your
for the
behavior and
to shut all
also the narratives
that.
that are being told. Say it
Yeah.
again.
Well, I know that's why they're trying to shut all the media down and they're trying to own
Hmm.
I know how they're trying to circumvent that broad spectrum awareness that we have nowadays because we have things at our fingertips. I get
Hmm.
why they're trying to do all of that. I just wonder if they're going to be as successful as it was back in the day when the UDC said, "Well, we'll just change the narrative in the textbooks and we're good." That's at least six to seven generations of people not knowing their own history, and
Well, they
so.
did have they are having test markets, right? Of like putting out these narratives and seeing how people respond. The thing is that
Right.
the mass of human beings aren't going to spend time doing research and fact checking and all of that. They're just
No.
going to believe that what is given to them is the thing and make decisions off of that. And
Right.
hopefully we maintain and or are teaching the next generation of people to be a lot more discerning about the information. Like I appreciate the narrative that's like continuing to remind us with the educational awareness that fact check everything that's on the internet is not true.
And then fact
You
check
need
your
to
fact checkers,
fact check your fact checkers, find out what your resources are. I mean, like
it's
that's
work.
the preliminary things that we learn when we're talking about, research and having primary source and secondary source. It's like really looking at what's true and then also being able to get things directly from the source because even with primary sources we got it directly from the source, but secondary sources are an interpretation of what reality is, and if people don't have the consideration of that primary source then they might convey it differently than what is
Well,
really the experience.
it's like a big ass game of it's the big whisper game.
Yeah,
Do
man. Exactly. Exactly.
you
Okay,
know
so we have to when we talk about these things, we have to describe what it is.
right.
So the whisper game happens like this. Go ahead.
So, we played it as a kid and it was probably done. The teachers were probably teaching us that you can't always trust what you hear. But
Yeah, man.
everybody would stand in a circle and there would be a statement that the teacher would come up with, just a sentence. And that sentence, each person would whisper that sentence into the ear of the person next to them. And by the time it gets around the circle, the last person will say the sentence out loud. And then you can compare what the original sentence was to the sentence that ended up after it went through all of those filters. If you had 20 kids in the class, go through 20 filters, and then how different the sentence would be by the time I got around the circle. And
Hmm.
that's what we're dealing with right now. Is that it's a big ass whisper game.
Yeah. No, for real, it's very, very, and what happens in those games is very rare that the thing that was said at the beginning is the thing that
Oh, very
comes
rare,
out at the end. Very rare,
very
like
rare.
super, super rare. So yeah, I mean, all of this is awe is awesome. I was gonna say awe-inspiring, but it's not really inspiring because there's like awe caution that
Mm.
is existing in me because I'm excited about transformation. I am concerned about who's leading it.
Mm. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. And
And
like what
but
their real intention.
but I'm with you on being, I mean, because what I was thinking of as we were just talking about that whisper game, I'm thinking we are being, because of all the, I mean, people are exhausted already, and it's been a month. We just passed a month of him in office, and people are exhausted already. But I've always believed that this country, that the US was, I used to tell my daughter that she was a 2x4 kid. She
Okay.
had to be
A
hit
two by
upside the head
four.
with a 2x4. Oprah
Uh-huh.
talked about this a long time ago. You get the
Yeah.
whisper, and then you
Yeah.
get the tap on the shoulder, and then you get the smack,
Someone need a two
and
by
you
four.
get the 2x4 upside the head, and then you get the brick wall. And it's like, if
Okay.
you need to train yourself to
I
try to
like
get
that.
the
Two by
message
four.
on the whisper, or maybe the tap on the shoulder. Otherwise you're always going to be getting hit upside the head. And
Yeah.
my kid was a 2x4 kid. She did not get the whisper. She did not get the tap on the shoulder. It was always had to be the 2x4. And our
That's so
country, our society, and I'll just speak about the U.S. because that's my lens, is a 2x4 lens or a brick wall. Maybe not even a two
yep.
by four.
Yeah.
So we, as detrimental and devastating as all of this stuff is, and how exhausting everybody already is, this is our 2x4. This is our, God forbid we have to get to the brick wall, but some would say that his elevation back into one of the most
Office is
positions of the land was it was the brick
catalyst.
wall. So
Yeah, yeah.
we're gonna
Absolutely. That
have
is
to
exactly.
we're gonna
Yeah.
have to morph or die.
Yeah. Yeah, man. And then, and it's not, and we're talking of really from a very US perspective because that's appropriate because that's where we're from and understand. But we're definitely seeing this trend on a globalized platform. And
Hmm.
so, and then you also have read the books and you read the historical accounts about, New World Order and us existing as humans under that ideology. And that's going to be difficult. It's looking difficult, so it is important to be where you're comfortable experiencing it because the train is way past the station.
Has left it so far,
Way, way past the
and
station.
has not only left the station but destroyed the
Mhm.
tracks behind it.
Mm.
so
Ooh,
so it can't go
yeah.
back.
Explain that further. I love that visualization, that metaphor.
Me too.
Um,
I think in
but
pictures, but
leaving like
well,
it's
we've it's left the station, and and what's interesting is that I'm being reminded that the one of the main things that the far right likes to hold on to was make it great again, to go back.
yeah
But
to something.
we can't go back. I mean, we won't. It's not. I don't even think we're. I don't think even think it's possible to go back to what they think was this idyllic time. I mean, the train is
Yeah.
station, but that's because they don't understand that empire is falling. They think
Hmm.
they're shoring up this, fortress that is impenetrable, and what they don't understand is they're literally tearing it to
Yeah.
shreds.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, yeah, it's. I mean, that's my theory, at least. There might be some of you out there that don't agree, but yeah.
I definitely hear you on that. And what are some of the things that we want to see maybe? This is a rhetorical question, right? But like it is something to be thinking about because I find myself in this moment not having a thought or a dream, but definitely like, okay, I need to wait till something settles or lands that
Mm,
is concrete to be
mhm.
able to know how I can move and make decisions because I have limited resources. So it's not like I can just like, well, let me try. Well, I mean, I am trying something new, but like, it's just not the same. So I definitely feel like a caution and a hesitation to like get to a place where something lands so you can know how it is that you have to maneuver
Right.
wherever you are in the world.
I
Yeah.
don't think we have it especially in the US, our society, this particular version of society.
Hmm.
doesn't have an imagination, doesn't, I
Mm,
find myself really challenged with that. And I also know that that's part of my indoctrination into whiteness is to not have an imagination, because why would you need to imagine anything new? I've got everything. I'm on top of the food chain. But having said
yeah.
that, when I try to think about how things can be done differently, when I try to imagine, and when I've been challenged by people in my circles say, well, what would you want it to look like if it could? I struggle, with that, to try
What
to
it could look like.
imagine what it could look like. That's not hierarchical. That's not, I'm a Trekkie, and my partner and I were talking about Star Trek last night, and how, I got into Star Trek. I wasn't the original series wasn't my thing, but Next Generation got me in, and
Okay.
the Next Generation, Star Trek Next Generation, that came
Who,
in the 90s, and for
so, but who are the people? Who the actors?
Patrick Stewart plays Jean-Luc Picard, the captain, and John
Okay.
Frakes is number one, and there's Data, and I mean I can name all of them. I love
Do you
getting.
think that we're going into that like we're moving into that direction where we'll be traveling in that way and having to engage different
Well,
realities? And then if we are engaging different realities, then what does that look like for how we've structured our hierarchies on Earth?
well, it's interesting because Star Trek is always so far ahead of its time, and I remember
Mhm.
Next Gen was out in the 90s and late 80s and 90s. And I remember watching it then thinking, God, this is so far, because they don't have any currency. Nobody has to buy anything from each other. There's just an abundance of, everything. And it's
Oh, I've never
and it's and it's all about
intergalactic.
intergalactic, and it's all about
Mm.
meeting new cultures, not to assimilate, but to just learn about each other and learn how to live together. And so it's what I know now is that it is a very indigenous mindset. I would say maybe there are indigenous people out there that would argue with that, but in my brain, through my own
No,
life,
as far as we understand it, yeah, like
feels
people,
indigenous in terms of the whole, just, and there are still warring, societies that approach everything, if you think, if all you've got is a hammer, you see everything's a nail. They still have societies that do that, and cultures that do that, but they're always trying to say, hey, why can't we just, there's plenty for everybody. The universe
yeah.
is infinite, right? And so why can't, and so yeah, it was way, way, way ahead of its time, and still very relevant in terms of, but they talk about the 21st century Earth as being
Mhm.
a warring place. In fact, we're rewatching Picard right now, and they've just traveled back in time, back to 2024, because they need to correct something in the timeline that's going to happen, that's going to turn everything into this horrific reality, and they want to make sure it doesn't happen. And
Oh
so
no, that's horrible. So that happens in 2024.
in 2024, yeah,
Yikes.
there's a certain deity, that's an entity that's shifted the timeline, and so Picard and everybody have gone back to try to make sure that doesn't happen, so that humanity projects in the, and ascends and gets better
That's,
in the way that
um,
it should, instead of this horrible reality that happens because this entity tweaks something. He's a little menace. His name is Q. And for all the Trekkies
mm.
out there, I'm speaking your language. But
Sounds very much like Marvel Universe. We had the same type of thing going on.
yeah, yeah,
But
yeah,
but I find this fascinating because my friends were here and we are all like having our own understanding about like what transformation looks like. We were having this conversation. You're talking about Star Trek. We were having this conversation about when we were young watching the Jetsons. And
yeah,
like
yeah.
we are actually living the Jetsons. Like if you think about the Jetson things, the microwave, food popping out, the way the refrigerators are, things that open, we haven't started having our own personal fly units yet. But we're there, right? Because I've seen them. I know that they're existing in
Probably
Europe. They're
only
having
because
like
there's too much
the
money in the transportation on the roads.
oh right.
That's why we don't have, because we wouldn't need
We don't
roads
have it yet.
anymore, right? And
We
everybody's like,
wouldn't need
well, there's too
roads.
much money to be made in the roads, so we can't, we
Man,
can't.
I wish they would learn that over here in Jamaica. Fix the roads, y'all. But anyway, there's a lot of money to be made.
Yes, there
But,
it is.
but we say that, and And thinking about Star Trek and thinking about coming to this time where you have to go back and fix something. Because I was going to ask you what I don't remember in any of the Star Trek episodes, and I haven't watched it as an adult human, but any of the Star Trek episodes, I was trying to recall what was happening on Earth. So you just gave me some insight to the fact that it was like warring. And then if you're looking at the other, you know, guidebooks like a Bible and Revelations, and there's all of these things that are happening that were spoken about in that book that could be related to
Mhm.
things that are happening now. And it's like we know that we are sitting and living in that moment of transformation. And then like,
Yeah.
what do we do about it?
Well,
Do you know what I mean? Like
I
to
mean,
your point, you can drive, you can know that a immigration center is right, or you can not. You could be driving past an immigration center and not know there's an immigration center, and it be having the same type of horrific things that concentration camps or Chinese camps or all of these things that we know about later on that were horrible humanitarian centers of destruction and harm to people. And when we ask ourselves, what would we have done at that time? Now we're sitting in the reality of what it is that you would be doing at that time.
yeah, yeah.
That is it.
But to your point about sitting and on some level, my word, I don't remember if you use this word, but waiting to see what happens, to know how to move and react. I do think that is part of it, that there's things to be doing. Like if I find out that there's a detention center, somewhere near me, or I find out where a detention center is, I could stand outside of it with a sign and say, did you know that they've got,
This is a detention
migrant
center.
children held captive in this building? I mean, there
If
are,
you're allowed to, you might
because
be arrested for that nowadays, though.
the shadows are why, why these kinds of realities are allowed to happen. And
Mm.
we didn't know there obviously there were people living in Auschwitz, in the town of Auschwitz, with
Hmm.
the
With the
concentration
concentration camp, right?
camp.
Right.
And did they
Well,
feel
you
safe?
hear the stories.
Yeah,
In community, you do hear the stories.
yeah,
And I am curious. I don't know, 'cause I don't know if you were able to hear me when you said it. Like you standing outside with a sign might not be legal anymore,
right.
and you get arrested because most of the detention centers are private industry.
Yeah,
So you can't protest
the
private
private property.
corporations because there's
Right,
more rights that corporations have than humans at this point.
right.
And so it's like these are things that we need to be thinking about in this new world order that we're existing in.
And not get so overwhelmed that we become stagnant.
Right. And learn how to take care of yourself and rest because a lot is going on and we are feeling it.
Why do I give a fuck? Why do
Thanks for
I
joining
give a
us.
fuck?
Until next time,
Why
as you
do I
move
try
throughout
so
your day,
hard?
continue to ask yourself,
Why do I give a
Why Do I Give a Fuck is produced in collaboration with Johanna and Diane. Music by Norwegian musician Water.
much?
See you next time.
Why do